All right, let's dive right in. First off, does anyone have any topics they would like to discuss? Any questions?
Current status of you're willing to establish a company.
Yes.
Are you time schedule or maybe don't know what's the plan for this year?
So the time schedule is a good question. I think within the next couple of months we should have be able to form a legal entity, and the main objective is to ensure continuity of the Elsa project, because as you know, it's an open source project, and I'm able to work on it because customers pay me to work on it because they need it for their system. So that's very good. But of course, it shouldn't depend on just one person, right? That's the bus factor of one. That's not good. So I would like to see if there's a way to share the knowledge that I have of the system and build a strong team of Elsa experts so that we can offer consultancy and support to companies out there, because there's companies large and small using Elsa in projects large and small as well. And so it's important for them that since Elsa being a core component of those systems, it will be good for them to be able to buy professional support, so that they don't have to rely on just one or two persons. So that's the main idea behind forming this company. And so I'm on the lookout for people who are interested in Elsa that also want to do consultancy and see where that goes.
Great. Sounds very good.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it, and it's a lot of fun.
Okay, that was my topic.
So let's make a note of that. So the entity for now, at least, is going to be called Elsa Digital. Probably it will be the name as well. But if anyone has any cool name, for a consultancy gig or company, that I'm open to hearing those ideas. But for now, it's going to be Elsa Digital, and it's going to offer premium support services around Elsa. And the long-term goal is for this entity to also work on commercial services like a marketplace with commercial modules, also free modules, but maybe for certain paid services that you have online, maybe it makes sense to also offer integration for those and ask a license fee for it, for example.
That's cool.
And maybe some pre-baked workflows that can be offered for sale for certain scenarios. That's on the one hand, and on the other hand, we also have ideas for a SaaS. So think logic apps, say think Zapier, but using the Elsa framework at the very least, and initially probably the same designer, or maybe a more enterprise grade studio. So you have deep integration with your own system, but also more advanced management of workflows and being able to configure it in a way that serves your specific business needs, being able to deploy to multiple environments, so you can manage multiple environments in a single place so that you can do the deployment easily. It's all still very conceptual, but that's what we are thinking of.
But especially the App Store thing could be very good, because if there are multiple tasks, like maybe integrations to chat systems, to email systems, to some other systems, third-party systems, that would increase the things you could do with Elsa, and you could do it out of the box, because the most of them could be for free, and maybe some of them are paid. That's good as well. You've got several more possibilities to do that, and you don't have to implement all the things by yourself, and it's a cool idea. I like it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's the main idea. And also, it's nice for other, third-party developers to earn a bit of extra income if they're able to publish a commercial module. Yeah, that's going to be very cool to work on.
Yeah, great.
All right. So so that's coming a couple of months away at least. Elsa 2 has 2.11 has been released, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, very recently. And I figured let's take a quick look at the release notes just to go over what's in that version. All right, so I have never used Kafka myself. I haven't written any of this module, but there's a few folks out there that provided a module to integrate with Kafka, and some fixes have come in 2.11, and in the master branch there's even follow-up fixes for this. So probably we'll do a release soon for 2.11.1 to also provide those fixes. Upgraded the rebus packages, so just a package update. Yeah, so this is a bug fix which has to do when using fork and join, I think, in combination with resuming or actually retrying a faulted workflow. So think of having a workflow instance, it faulted, then you fix the issue that caused the fault to begin with. Then you want to retry the workflow instance, but that wouldn't work properly before this fix. That's been fixed. Mohammed did some nice performance improvements. I haven't tested it myself yet. I've been too busy with the Elsa 3 development, but I believe he noticed he had a noticeable improvement submitted here, so that's good. So this is the Elsa 2 designer, not the new designer in Elsa 2, which is based on X6. This is the improvement for the library, the Dagger library that's being used. More Kafka, delete many fixes. Okay, so this is in the persistence layer for Postgres. Nice, so that's there as well. Credential manager fixes, tension specification fixes from Dependabot, some packets bumps, some extensibility to customize the SQL client factory, mediator packets upgrades, copy paste work, making that work across multiple domains. So this is related to the new designer in Elsa 2, which is based on X6, and copy paste works, but in a limited way. So this allows you to copy paste across multiple Elsa instances. It's my understanding. I haven't tried it, but that's what I gathered from that. Webpack and more Kafka. So a lot of Kafka enhancements here. So that's good. 2.11. So past week, been very busy with more fixes, more stabilization of Elsa 3, specifically related to JSON serialization. And the complexity basically boils down to system text JSON serializer and together with polymorphic serialization or serializing an object. So for example, a workflow instance can have properties, which is a dictionary with a string key, but an object as its type. And when you serialize any kind of object in this dictionary and you don't specify the type information, then upon deserialization, it will deserialize into JSON element instances, which is the default behavior, which is tricky to use when in combination with JavaScript or the Jint interpreter, because there you actually what you want to be able to use is expando objects, unless it's a .NET type. That would be even better. But if not, then you certainly don't want JSON elements, because then you can't use dot syntax or dot notation. So I wanted to always deserialize into either a .NET type or an expando object. So a lot of work has been done into ensuring this. So it's much better now. I did a small change here. Actually, I should show this one. It's not nothing big, but I think it's more intuitive for users. Oh, this was so cool. The ChatGPT, let me show you. I got so stuck for a day and a half, and then I was about to give up, and I asked ChatGPT to help me, and it actually helped me. Like it was literally, well, figuratively speaking, life-saving. Let me see if I can, this one. So here, basically, the issue was that I have a custom converter, and for some reason, this converter, when executed, outputs the following JSON, where the type, this is my custom metadata field for storing the .NET type, was output twice, and I couldn't figure it out. And I've been banging my head against the wall for a day and a half. So I put in this issue, and then ChatGPT just figured out the issue. It was spot on, and in hindsight it was so obvious, but it wasn't at the time. You know how it is, right? You're too deep into it, and you start to have tunnel vision. And here it just notices the issue, and basically the issue was that because of I think it's recursive nature, and it describes that the write method, I'm writing out the properties of JSON element, but if you write it directly to the writer, then you might write it again, and that's exactly what happened. And then he suggested a little change here.
That's crazy.
It's mind blowing, isn't it?
Understand what you're thinking and what you've coded and fix it. That's crazy.
Yeah, there's so much to this. I don't even comprehend it. It's as you say, it understands my problem. It understands the code that I pasted in. It understands the output and how it then is able to.
It understands your sentences in your natural language, not within code or something like that. That's crazy.
Indeed, I don't even have to be very formal in the way or structured in the way I describe the issue. I can just blur something out, and it understands it better than team members some of the times. if I don't speak clearly. So
is there already a ChatGPT activity, Elsa?
No, not yet, but it's a good one to have.
Yeah, maybe on the marketplace, the first app, and the ChatGPT activity could write all the other activities that are following.
You know what would be even cooler? So that would be very cool, and that's going to be there, right? This integration with ChatGPT,
Yeah.
no doubt. But what about the following, where you know how it is, right? We have different levels of programming languages. The lowest
Yeah.
level being ones and zeros. Then you have assembly,
Yeah.
and then you have, you know, the modern languages like C
C++,
sharp.
yeah, C sharp.
At the end of exactly, and it's at the end of the day, it's all specifications. So and now you have also workflows, which is a different kind of specification. It's, you know, you could create the specification visually, but could also be JSON, doesn't matter. ChatGPT is just a higher level of specifying what you want, so in a more natural language. So what if you could do that? You can already do it for programs or little snippets of code at least, but I can imagine also having the ability to do it for workflows. So you describe the process that you want. The more information you give it, the better it will, the more accurate it will be in the workflow output. But I would love to have a variation of ChatGPT that can do that for you. So I'm gonna, at some point, I'm gonna dig a little bit into that. That would be so cool.
Right now, there's a button on the right corner, import from file, and maybe there's a button to create from ChatGPT input or something like that, and it creates a workflow based on your language. Correct?
Yes, exactly. That's a good idea. So yeah, so that was a little tangent on serialization and ChatGPT saving the day. Automatic activity registration. What was that about? I don't recall actually. But what I do wanted to show is the some enhancements to the event activity. I think that's also a nice little demo that I can show to demonstrate the ability of event and to publish. It's a core functionality of the core offering. I mean of the activities. So, and it's what it allows you to do, this pair of having an event and publish, which is the equivalent of signal or sending signals and receiving signals in Elsa 2. It's a good way to communicate from your application with the workflow back and forth. So the workflow can communicate with your application using events, and your application can communicate to the workflow using events. And that can happen from application code to workflows, but also across workflows or even within the same workflow. So it's a very nifty combo, these two activities. So I want to just show you how that works. So for example, the simplest one would be to just have the event activity, mark it as can start workflows, to turn it into a trigger that can start new workflows. And an event requires you to provide a event name. So maybe order submitted. So when you have this event with this name, your application or through the REST API or another workflow can raise an event with this name, order submitted, and then that would kick off this workflow. And of course, maybe you want to also provide the order itself that has been submitted, right? So if the application provides this payload, you can capture it here using the output of this event. So it will transparently forward its input. So you have to know that whenever you invoke a workflow, you can provide an input payload, and this event will, whatever input it receives, will be forwarded to this output here. So for example, let's say you have an order, and that also gives me the chance to mention what I was about to mention, which is the rename of expandable object to just JSON as an experiment, because I think in this context, the purpose of an expandable object is in order to be able to treat it as JSON objects or JavaScript objects. So I renamed it here. So we'll use it like that. So we don't need a strong .NET type. Of course, we can register our own types. For example, order, we could add it to this list and then use it in that manner. But for now, we'll use JSON, and then we'll capture it in this list. First, we need to refresh the list like this. And so here we'll capture the order. And then maybe we will just send it to an HTTP response, which would only work if this workflow is invoked from a HTTP context in the first place. So that's something to be aware of when using HTTP response, of course. So here we'll just say, let's use liquid order received. And let's imagine that the order has a product field, which represents the product that we ordered. So your variables that order that product, all right. And then the content will be the content type will be just plain text. That's it. All right, so let's call this workflow order submitted, and we'll publish this. And now let's show how to invoke this event. The first way to do it is through the REST API. That's the easiest without having to write custom code. So we'll do that. So here we're looking at the REST API endpoint that we can invoke. So the way it works, we have the base address at which the Elsa endpoints are listening, which is your localhost /Elsa/API. That's configurable, by the way. And then the events, that's part of one of the endpoints. This segment is the event name, and I should not have copied I did that out of habit. We don't need the definition ID, of course. We just need the event name, which is already here, so that's convenient. And then trigger. And just to remind myself, when you trigger an event, you can provide a payload, as I'm doing here. I will remove this for now. And there's a couple of options we can provide. One of them is being the input, and there's another option to control whether you want to dispatch the workflow. So basically execute it in the background asynchronously in response to a message that was sent to dispatch the workflow. So that means the workflow would be executed by some message worker, or synchronously, which means it will execute in the same HTTP context. So that's what we want here, since we are using the HTTP response. So to control that, we can provide a field called workflow execution mode. I think it's called synchronous, although I noticed that this isn't used, so probably I didn't finish the implementation. I did, so it's just an if else. So this should work. Let's see. And of course, we need to provide input. So we do that through the input field, which maps to the input field here on the DTO against which the request will be model bound. And as you can see, it's of type object, so you can provide a dictionary of values. So in our case, we're going to give the key name that's going to be order. This is important because whatever name we specify here, actually, so forget about that. I don't remember actually what the let's just try it out to see exactly how it works. I think this input would be copied as is into the object here. So if this is this, so the entire thing will be added here, I think. So yeah, that has to be the way. So input and then that order. This
But I
would
think
be,
there's a typo in the synchronous. Oh no, sorry, synchronous. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
could be. Let's see. I'm not getting any issues here, so I think it's fine. Yeah. So ID 1. So basically, the value here will represent the order, if I'm not mistaken, but we will see. And this would be the product. I think I used uppercase, so let's use uppercase here as well. And this would be pizza. And now we send this one. Of course, first we need to authorize or create an access token. And to do that, we go to identity and then log in with the power user. And now we try it again. All right, let's see what this is. Specified workflow definition version doesn't exist. Let me try with the debugger at that. API address, events, event name, trigger. All right, let's see what happens. I wonder if this is one of my previous tests pointing to a workflow state that's now responding to this, because we are not using correlation or scoping it to a workflow instance. So let me just make sure and clean the database. Let me also make sure to clean the bookmarks. All right, so close, but no cigar. We're missing the input here. Let's see if I can fix it quickly. Variables, order, products. So here okay, so we need, this wasn't captured, so let's try this again. Oh, no, this is captured here. Variables. Or let me just try this in JavaScript. Maybe I'm not getting the syntax right. And if not, it's okay. The main point was to show the event, but it would be nice to also show how to deal with the input. So let's see. So in JavaScript, you say like this: get order dot product. Okay, so I'm getting the binding incorrect. So let me set up a quick breakpoint here. So input is going to be dictionary. So now I wonder if there's a convention that I invented to bind the variable name to the input. So let's take a look at the event to see how it passes along the input as its output. So now that I look at this code, I'm doubting myself that I'm actually providing or passing along the input. So it could be that that's the idea, but I didn't get to finish that implementation. So in that case, let's just ignore the input for now. This is the endpoint. Here we get the input. The input looks like this. It has the order key and then the expando object representing the order. So that's all good. Then we publish and then we complete, but never setting the result. So that's the issue here. I'll just let me take a quick note. All right, sorry about that. I should have tested this before.
It's fine.
Okay, so now let's pretend we do have some inputs. And yeah, so that's what I want to show as one way to trigger events is to do it through REST APIs. Of course, it doesn't have to be a trigger, right? We could also imagine having a workflow that starts either manually from the application or by some other trigger. Maybe we have just a normal starting activity or a normal activity like this one where we say submitting order. But this is just a regular write line. It's not a trigger. So we need to invoke this workflow manually. We'll remove this trigger. We could leave it as is, and then we can trigger this using the event, but then it would start at this point and ignore this activity here. So, but to be clear, I prefer to uncheck this one so that it becomes apparent that this is a blocking activity, not a trigger. So updating the display text. So what will happen now? We will invoke this workflow and it will execute event, but that will create a bookmark because it's now a blocking activity. And then we have to manually trigger the event like we did just a second ago to continue or resume the workflow. So this time we do need the definition ID because now we're gonna use another REST API to execute this particular workflow like this. So now it executed, we received an instance ID, which would be useful for the in case you wanted to trigger an event of a specific workflow instance. Without workflow instance, any workflow that's either uses an event as a trigger or is blocked on an event by that event name will be resumed. So you can use events to resume or start multiple triggers. But if you don't want that, you will want to scope it to a specific workflow instance. And in that case, you will want to take a note of this. For now, we'll ignore this. We'll take a quick look at the workflow instances and see that this latest workflow instance is in the status running. And just to remind those who are used to Elsa 2, in Elsa 2, status running means the workflow is actually actively running at that moment. So it's actually in memory doing stuff. But in Elsa 3, there's a status and there's a substatus. And the substatus is not shown here at the moment. But in Elsa 3, running means the workflow isn't canceled. It's not exactly. It's not. It's just ongoing. It's even
so
even if it's
in Elsa 2 it should be suspended.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. In Elsa 2 it would be suspended. In Elsa 3, the substatus is suspended. So if we look at the workflow instances or workflow instances here, we see that the status is running, but the substatus is suspended. So this is basically the reason it's still running. It could also be finished and then faulted. So the workflow is done, but this is the reason it's done because it faulted or because it's finished or because it was cancelled. So that's a small difference there. This is suspended, and we can see from the journal that the event one, it has completed. That's not correct. We should make this a little bit more granular because yes, it completed, but it also created a bookmark. So it would be good to visually be able to communicate that to this user. But for now, we know it's blocked here, so it's waiting for this event. So we can trigger that event, which we did just a second ago. So let's do it. And then it should have finished, and it's finished indeed. And then we also see that. So here it completed, and then here it was resumed. So another entry is made here. But yeah, there's some work to be done on the workflow journal, and then it finished here. So that's good. Yeah, go ahead.
As I figured out the last days, but I'm still working on Elsa 2, and I didn't find any duration field for the whole workflow. So if it's finished, it would be great to have a field where the duration is written. So yes, I know I could use the created and the ended and calculate it by myself, but a duration field would be great for the future.
You mean for the whole of the workflow?
For the whole workflow, yeah.
Yes.
Execution of the whole workflow.
Yeah, and actually we have this in Elsa 3, but we are hiding the first two entries. The first one would be the workflow itself, which is an activity, and then the flow chart, which is the root of the activity, the first one to a schedule. And we thought it would be a good idea to hide it because it's always the same. But to your point, if we were to show that again, then we would see the total duration because these durations are for this activity here.
Yeah. Maybe on the right side, ungraded or on left bottom side, total duration or something like that.
Yeah, that's also a good idea to have some statistics and stuff like that. Yeah, that's a good idea.
And the HTTP response is sent to the clients that publish the event.
Yeah, exactly. So in this case, it was Postman, Postman sent an HTTP request, which caused the Elsa engine to resume this one, and this one then finished resuming or yielding control back to the flowchart on which this one is part, which then follow this connection to the next one, and that's still happening in that same HTTP context. So this one is writing back to that HTTP response object in that context, effectively responding to the request here, and that's why we see the response here.
But we can have multiple times the same event.
Yeah, that's a good
registered.
question.
If maybe there is, it could be a multiple workflow with order submitted event.
Oh yeah.
I think there is no control on how much this event is used and by any application, and in that case, multiple and even for the same workflow, if you just use the same workflow definition and start twice this workflow, you can submit order twice. It will start 2 instances of this workflow.
Oh yeah, so let's do that. So let's run this one twice. So execute and once and twice. So now we have 2 instances. As we can see here, they are all both running and suspended. So they are both now blocked on this one. So now if we resume or trigger the event, this is the event, then we do that, and then we get an error because status code cannot be set because the response has already started. So obviously, this workflow in this setup is a bad idea, because exactly what you explained and what we are seeing now. So this is something to keep in mind, which you have to do anyways when you deal with HTTP context and responses. You have to be aware that you shouldn't write the headers twice, right? So this is just a buggy workflow that it doesn't make much sense. You should probably do it using events. If you did want to do it, you have to be because maybe there's a case where you do want to use events to communicate and control workflow execution, but then you need to make sure that the event is only used for one workflow instance and not 2. So let's see how that works. Let's see if these 2 are. So 1 finished and 1 faulted, which is correct. So let's do it again. Let's start 2 new instances, but this time we want to oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. This one. So we start 2 instances, which we have here, but now we want to, let's say, only resume this one. So I copy the ID, then we go back to the trigger event API, but this time we want to target a specific one. So we include the workflow instance ID like this. So now when we send, start index, but that's incorrect JSON.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So this time it worked because only one workflow instance was resumed. So, but you make a good point. This is something to be aware of when dealing with workflows that can potentially be triggered by multiple workflows can be triggered, and if they involve HTTP responses, that's could be problematic if you're not careful.
And to go further, I think also about security in event, because anyone can fire an event, and anyone can receive this event in any workflow and deals with the data in this event.
Are you referring to in a multi-tenant environment,
for example?
or yeah, because that's true. Yes. So that needs to be taken into account. Maybe using some token, some signature or something, like a SAS token. That could be it, and then that would have to be validated somehow. Of course, currently this endpoint, and it will remain protected. This endpoint is, even though it's available publicly, you do need an access token with the proper permissions, right? So I am including an access token, which in this case, it has full permissions, but individual endpoints specify their security requirements in terms of permissions that you need. Just to take a quick look.
And is there some kind of event store, like a bookmark store, etc.?
No, actually, this takes advantage of the bookmarks and the triggers. So yeah. So if we look at bookmarks, there's currently just one bookmark because we still have one workflow instance that's blocked on the event order submitted. So that uses the same mechanism. And triggers currently should be empty. But if we used it as a starting activity and marked it as can start workflow, then we would see a trigger as well. So yeah, but yeah, good point with the security. I know with I think in Elsa 2, when you generate a URL to trigger a signal, it includes a security token or a SAS token, a shared access token, and then that makes it so that will be at least good to have this option for events as well. So thank you for that. Yeah, so this is how you can resume workflows using events, that using a workflow instance ID, and of course you can also do it using correlation. So maybe you don't have a workflow instance, but or you want to do it through a business entity ID, maybe a document ID or a customer ID, or in this case maybe an order ID. That would work too. All right, so we've looked at doing it through the REST API. We can also do it from another workflow. So maybe, yeah, let's leave this as is. Let's say we have a new workflow called process order. And then the point of this one would be to resume the other workflow. So we have the publish event activity, and it requires you to specify the event that you want to publish. And again, this could potentially publish many workflows, whether they are suspended or started. You can use this to kick off multiple workflows. In this case, we want to maybe use correlation so that we only resume the workflow instance of a particular order ID. That would be maybe a good use case. So let me find the event name here, like this. Correlation ID can be specified here. So we don't have one right now, but let's imagine we receive the order as input to this workflow, and then the order would be one. Let's say. So let's go here. Submitting order. Let's correlate this workflow with the order ID. And actually, I don't want to hard code this. Maybe we should just provide some input. So let's do that. Let's accept some input. So for that, we will declare, we can use this order. In this case, we are just going to use the set variable. So we'll use this one to set the order based on the input we receive. So the input would be provided through the REST API to execute the workflow. And that would look like this. So let's go here. If you're hearing weird noises, that's my dog. She's very vocal. So let's say inputs, and this would be order, and this would have a ID. So this is the model of the order. It will be stored here, and we will read it from the input. So for that, we use get input, and it requires you to specify the name of the input. And the name of the input is this key here. So this is just handled by the endpoint, which understands this field, and then it sees these as a key, and then the values. So the key is order. So we're reading the order from the input. Then we're going to submit the order, or just write it to the console. Let's be fancy here and just use the order name, or the order ID, lowercase. And then we'll also correlate this workflow instance with this particular order ID. All right, so this is now correlated. Here, this event will be blocking the workflow. And then when resumed, we will.
Could you explain what correlated does? The activity correlated with what's the meaning of that?
Yeah, sure. So a workflow instance can be correlated with a custom value or business value. So a workflow instance has an ID, which is controlled by the system, but maybe sometimes you want to associate your workflow instance with a business value, maybe like a customer ID, or in this example, an order ID. And that's could be useful when you have maybe multiple workflows that deal with a given business domain object, such as customer, or in this case, order. And correlation is the act of associating your workflow instance with that particular value. So if we look at the database structure here, we see, of course, the ID. This is the workflow instance ID, and here's a correlation ID, which by default is null. But if you provide it with a value, you can use that value to locate workflow instances.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah, so it prevents you from having to create lookup tables yourself in case you wanted to associate workflow instances with a document or an order. So it's there for convenience.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question, and here we're taking advantage of that feature. So we are associating the received order ID with this workflow instance ID, which is convenient because from the other workflow, we don't know what the workflow instance ID is. We just know we want to publish an event about a certain order. So we have the order ID, but we don't know which workflow instances would be interested in that. So that's I think a good example. All right, so order received. This is okay. So we'll publish this one. Yeah, so the flow will be as follows. We'll start this workflow. We'll submit an order, and then this workflow will be blocked. And the way to resume it is to invoke the other workflow. So let's take a look at the other workflow, process order. So here we also need to know the order ID, because this activity will publish this event and will provide the correct order ID from the REST API. So let's do the same thing. We'll create a variable, and here we'll just say order ID. We don't need the full order, and then use that variable to set the order ID, which we capture from the input that we know we will receive. So we'll say get input order ID. We might make this case insensitive, and maybe it already is case insensitive. I'm not sure, but I think it might be more helpful to make this not case sensitive. But for now, it is. So we have to take that into account. And then here we'll use that captured input, get order ID. All right, we'll publish this, and then let's try it out. So we're gonna execute order submitted workflow that has this definition ID, which should be the same as we already have here. Yep, we're gonna submit the order like this. Order ID product. Okay, so let's see what we see here. Workflow instances. So it has a correlation, as you can see, it's running. It has a correlation ID, which is the order ID that we provided here. So that's one. Good. So now we want to resume this workflow, but we want to do it using the other workflow. So let me copy this request and call it process order, let's say. So here we need to use the definition ID of the other workflow, this one. And here we need to provide input, but not the entire object. We can just say order ID 1. There you go. So now we send this one. This one was executed as well. And to be honest, I would have expected a response from the other workflow, but maybe this publish event by default uses dispatch. Let's see if that's the case. Okay, yeah, so it uses dispatch, which means the other workflow is resumed, but in a background worker context, which doesn't have HTTP context. So it would have written something to the response, but that will be ignored or not even happen because probably some logic will skip that. Otherwise, accessing an HTTP response that doesn't exist would cause an error. Let's see what happens here. So we see process order finished. This one is still running, so not sure why. Okay, so I think there's a bug here because I can clearly see it was resumed. As you can see here, when this executed here, then it was resumed, and then it went to write HTTP response. But I think this may have faulted, or at least led into a path that doesn't complete this activity. Same time, if this is marked as completed, so that's interesting. Let me refresh this. So this is finished, running suspended. Okay, so it didn't fault either. I think it led into a code path that's not handled well, so I need to debug this. But to make this example work, let's just replace that HTTP response with a console write line. Okay, let's try this again. So we go to execute this. Let's change this order to 2, and then we'll go to process order and resume it to B2. And then if that worked, then we should see this write line. So yeah, so okay, here's some hint as to the previous execution. This is the first one, and I think this maybe was the last one. Maybe, but I will look into that. So that's always good to test with you guys to find these bugs. All right, so, and of course, the third way to deal with these events and which could be very powerful is to integrate with your application where you have application logic that uses the Elsa APIs internally, not the REST APIs, but just the Elsa services. If your Elsa engine is in the same process, of course, as your application to invoke these events.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, there's a very simple API for that, which is of course used by the endpoints internally. So basically, you would use the event publisher, and it has 2 methods: one to do synchronously, and asynchronously using dispatch. But the signature is the same.
Nice, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see if we are over time, but just to see if there's anything else. Scoped variables. That's a very important fix. I don't know if I fixed it last week already, but or maybe I was in the process of. But as I've shown a couple of times, you can create sub workflows or workflows that you can use as activities. For example, yeah, I talked about this, right? So here, for example, we have a a sum workflow, which can be used as an activity. So that means we have an activity here called sum, and this one, it's a very simple workflow. It has just one activity that sets the workflow output to the sum of its inputs. So here we have input A and B, and we output it as a result. But last time when I showed this, we had to be careful about the names of the variables and the inputs, because everything was in the same scope, if you will. So all of these variables are stored in some global dictionary, which is shared across all activities in the workflow definition. So that could lead to conflicting variable names. And at runtime, what you would see is one activity would override the variable that was set by another activity or higher up in the workflow, which would cause issues. But that's been fixed. So every activity has its own scope of variables. So here we have A, B, and result. And then we can have a workflow that uses this activity, like the sum workflow, which is consuming the sum activity. Let me fix this. So here we have variables A, B, and result, but they are in their own scope. So it's now you don't have to worry about the names of the variables. So yeah, I won't go through this example again. We've looked at this one a couple of times. Unless you want to see this one run, just let me know.
It's fine for me.
All right, good.
If we have just 2 or 3 minutes, just have couple of questions because I've detected some bugs, so it's just to see if you have the same thing on your side.
Sure.
For example, if you use a switch, when you can go inside, it's
this one.
Yeah, this one. When you click on default to go inside the switch, can you add some activity here? And does it save when you go back and return? Because I have some issue. Yes. Okay. So it's strange.
Are you using the latest version?
I think so. Because with the PR, I have to get the latest version, but I will try again. Okay, and I use the Elsa sample workflow server, but I don't have any workflow instances history.
Yes, I know why. Let me show you. So if you look at Elsa workflow
in the
server web, yeah, this one works and this one doesn't.
Okay.
Yes. So, and I can explain why. Let me find this one,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the key thing is this line here. Use async workflow state exporter, which is a setting you configure on the workflow runtime.
Okay.
And if we add it, I can add it here. So here we're not configuring the runtime, so it's using the default one. Let's just copy the entire thing.
Yes, we use just workflow management.
Yeah, exactly. But do it like this. So with these lines, that should now work, because what happens is you won't see the workflow instances, but you should see workflow states. So here, the default runtime uses the workflow states table to store workflow instance state. And the idea is that when you use a different runtime, let's say proto-actor, you don't need database storage for the workflow instances, because every workflow instance is now handled in memory as an actor. So so the only reason we have this table for the default runtime is because we need to have this somewhere. So it could be in memory, but then it doesn't work across nodes. So we have tables. With proto-actor, you don't need to have that. It's all managed. But of course, if you want to persist the workflow instances and be able to look at it from the designer, you need a place to look at that. So in order to capture the workflow state as it gets updated or created, there's a thing called the workflow state exporter, and that's just a let's see. So that's a service that implements iWorkflow state export, and this one is invoked by the runtime. So the runtime or some handler listens for workflow state or workflow instance executed or something like that, or workflow executed, I believe, and that will then invoke iWorkflow state exporter. But by default, this is a no op or no operation. But if you do want to capture it, just install the async workflow state exporter, which will asynchronously send the workflow state using a command called export workflow state to db command, and this is then handled by the persistence layer. And of course, you can implement your own export if you wanted to export to Elastic servers or whatnot. And I think actually I think this one is configurable. I think it's
yes, because there is a management that use workflow definition or use workflow instances, but I hope use entity framework core with configure the two. But I understand that I need the exporter to get some async export of the information.
That's right. Yeah. So
Okay.
so the workflow runtime by default using anti-framework core will use workflow state. So you will have this table, but the designer doesn't use this one. It uses workflow instances, and the reason is it's decoupled. So workflow state is only there if you use the default runtime, but if you use proto-actor, this will not be there. But you still want access to workflow instances. But you need to opt in to that for performance reasons. Not all scenarios require workflow instances to be captured, although to be fair, probably most scenarios do require it. So maybe it should be an opt-out instead. We're still, trying to determine what's the most commonly used scenario and provide proper defaults or sensible defaults. But this is the reason.
Okay, and okay, that's cool. And the last thing is I publish a pull request for the Angular wrapper. So we cannot take some time to discuss on this. There is a different thing. Just to I have decomposed all the thing. There is a lot of file change, but it's because I move the project, the Elsa designer project, one folder behind in the designer package, and use Lerna JS, which is a monorepo tool that allows us to get multiple kind of project in a monorepo and a symlink for the different npm package, and maybe next week we can discuss on this. I have created an Angular Elsa dashboard, which is the sample project that use the wrapper and the Elsa initial package to create an interface with the designer and some other button that allows the user to manipulate the designer. And because of this, we can see that the designer, there is some extensibility point that are missing in the designer to, for example, load a workflow, publish a workflow, etc., etc.
But that's awesome. That's really good. So
so this allows us to see what is necessary to extend the designer for other people and other application.
Yeah.
And once it's good, with the same work, I can create the wrapper for Vue.js and React.js. That's the same. It's just an output target in the Elsa in the stencil config in the Elsa workflow designer.
That's pretty amazing. I didn't know that was possible.
Really cool, yeah.
Yeah. Please do walk us through all of this next week, or now if you're up to it.
Yes, I can just rebuild, and that's okay for me. I can show you.
Do you want to share a screen?
Yeah, is everything okay? Okay, so that's the demo effect. So first of all, we see that if we just load the designer, the tag, the HTML tag Elsa Studio, we have the Elsa background, which is a display, and here I have set only the designer. I remove the toolbar available in the shell, and I have created my own button, and using the service inside provided by the Elsa package, I can interact with the workflow. I can create a new workflow. Okay, so workflow test. This one will be registered. Okay, I can access to other. So here I have to refresh, for example, this list, but I can access already available workflow. And if, for example, if I refresh, I can see the new workflow test. Okay, and the publish button is outside the Elsa designer and environment. And when I published, okay, the event was took, and I sent to the designer the order to publish the workflow, and the rest was done by the designer. And if we look in the component, so the idea is to create HTML and use only the Elsa Studio. So for this, there is some strange behavior because I need to specify the settings for the Axios HTTP client. But when I set the parameter on these settings, the Elsa Studio use component and service outside. These different services are well set when you use all the Elsa Studio shell, but in this case, I have to set the parameter and the settings manually. So this is done in the init. So with the container service, I can get all the DI, all the dependency injection. I take the server setting, I set the base address for the server. I get the login API. I log the user, so I don't have any login screen. I log the user. I set the authentication context. Then I set the interceptor to be sure that every HTTP call used by the studio will be correctly authenticated. And then to be sure that the studio doesn't have any issue, because when it sets some element, I have to be sure that some components like the activity descriptor manager are set, because they are set internally when you use all the shell, and I have to set all this information before. Otherwise, I get an error and I can't use the designer. I use the service workflow API to call the backend API and get the list of the workflow, and then using the workflow definition plugin, which is the service used by the designer component, I can show the workflow definition in the editor. I can also delete and publish. But to succeed to do this, I was forced to expose some method publicly. The show workflow definition editor is only available private. I was forced to set this one public, and maybe I can check this on the.
Sorry, guys, I have to leave. So thank you for all of that and great feature, and see you next week.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Hannes. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
So just a quick thing, because I was not able to use this syntax, because this one used some TSX syntax in Stencil. I cannot use the syntax in Angular, so I have to allow this method to be public. Same thing for workflow updated, and I've added also publish current workflow to be able to publish the workflow inside the designer. And this one is public, but use the internal event used by the editor. And I think there is some tricks and some method to expose to be sure that any developer can embed the studio inside his application.
Got it. Yeah, and that makes sense. We probably need to do some policing and maybe make certain methods more formal through services. So maybe they don't have to use the plugin object, for example, but maybe we extract this reusable logic into a service that you can then use from your Angular application, which is possible. That's pretty amazing that you can use the container dependency injection service to get the services you want to interact with and just use it from Angular. That's pretty cool.
And it was easier with Elsa V2, because in Angular V2 we use the tag, for example, with a definition ID. For example, we've set Elsa Studio dash editor with a definition ID property was just the ID, and then the editor use the Axios client to get all the definition. Now the component directly use a workflow definition object. So
I see. Yeah.
for this, we have to be sure that the wrapper is correctly created, and we can't. No, we have to be sure that the wrapper is correctly configured to be sure we can pass custom object and complex object to the component. And my next step is to be able to display the instance, not designer, but the instance
Viewer.
component. Yeah, the instance viewer. And for this, after, for me and for my use case, I will be able to embed Studio and the new engine inside my application. That's cool.
That's amazing. And good timing too, because I'm gonna want to integrate this designer into a separate application as well. So this is very useful for me.
Yeah, and the only thing is we have Angular, okay, and we can then with the same structure. So we all, if the PR is okay, we already have Lerna, so we can create other directory, create the React component library to create a Vue component library, and that will be available to a lot of people. And the last thing is, I think it's not Studio. I also have changed the GitHub action to be sure that this action and the build designer work with the new Lana repo, and it build the designer and then the Angular workspace in the good order.
So does this also produce components that Angular developers can use out of the box, or how does that work?
Yes, it's so with this configuration, we've got in the app, we've got we need the Angular library. So it's a package that we can publish on npm, and I decide to name it the Workflow Designer Angular wrapper. And the user, the Angular developer, will need this package and the initial Elsa Workflow Designer. The first one, the wrapper will allow it to include this module in his Angular library, and it will expose all the components. So if we look at this here, we have the components, and so the different tag available in the HTML. And in the initial package, this one, the user will have access to all the models, interface, and services. And he did the two package.
Amazing.
And that's
really
why also I've made some change here. So now in the stance package, yes, I've changed this one to export all the type necessary. So I have an interface.d.ts with all the necessary type export for the user, and I also export the different service from the index.ts. I don't really understand fully why we need always different file, while we can just export all from component.d.ts, but it seems that not all the component and all the service are automatically exported. So you have to choose what you want to export. And I've added this one, for example, for the different service to be available for the end user.
Right. So if I understand correctly, as people start integrating the designer into their applications, they might run into a service that they want to use, but it's not exported. So we will have to update it here, but then it's available for when we release new packets. It's not something that the Angular developer, the integrator has. They don't do it on their end, but we need to expose these services and types this way, and then we generate the packets.
Yeah, right. And after, if we don't change anything on the component, on the web component, we don't have to change the wrapper. The wrapper is for the web component. If we, for example, add one services in the Elsa package, the Angular developer just need to update the Elsa initial package, not the Angular wrapper. Because the definition of the web component didn't change.
Yeah, makes sense. And then once this is finalized, you mentioned React. So that's just, is that a lot of work, or do you need to replicate a lot from what's specific to Angular and make it available for React?
No, I think we don't need to make some big work. We just need to use the React output target, like I do with Angular. One thing is because we use some specific type with array of, I have to troubleshoot this, but now it's done for Angular. I think we don't have any issue with React or Vue.
Brilliant. So I think that's going to make some people happy. I think React and Angular, that's the most commonly asked for support and feature to support.
Yes, and just to final thoughts regarding the last discussion of Blazor, I don't have any constraint to use a Blazor web component, but it just need to have the good extensibility point to be used by any developer.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. I look forward to merging this PR. Let me know when it's ready to be merged. If not already, then play around with it.
Yes,
soon.
I think it's quite finished. I have to double check the package.json with ES next or ES 2022 to be sure that everything compiled correctly.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, makes sense. I'll hold off merging until you give the green lights, and then I'm gonna play around with it.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.